For anyone who doesn't know yet, Mount Rainier National Park has officially introduced its brand new pilot program for the 2024 peak recreation season, a timed entry reservation system. What does this mean? When do you need a reservation? How do you get a reservation? I've got you covered. Let's talk about when to get a reservation. So, this plan specifically is trying to mitigate overcrowding in the Paradise and Sunrise areas. So, those are the two areas that you are going to need a reservation for. If you plan on visiting the Sunrise corridor between July 3rd and September 2nd, between the hours of 7 and 3 p.m., you are going to need a reservation. And if you plan on visiting the Paradise region of the park between May 24th and September 2nd, between 7 and 3 p.m., you are also going to need a reservation. Now, if you plan on visiting the park outside of these dates, outside of these times, you do not need a reservation. This system also only applies to motor vehicles, so cars and motorcycles. If you are riding a bike in, you're exempt. The other people that are exempt from making a reservation to gain entry to the park is anybody who has a lodging reservation at one of the two inns or is staying at Cougar Rock Campground. Now, you still have to arrive after 1 p.m. on your actual first date of your reservation. However, if you want to enter early, you certainly can. You just have to actually make a timed entry reservation in that case. Now, it's important to note that there are no cancellations, refunds, or transfers available. So you really do have to plan your trip well in advance to make sure that you are able to gain entry to the park. They're going to have a limited number of reservations available 90 days prior every single day to the date that you want to visit. So, say I wanted to visit 60 days from now, I probably should have been looking at tickets 30 days prior, right? However, if you are a local or you are fond of spontaneity and the mountain is out and the weather looks great and you want to go visit the mountain tomorrow, you can do that. They release a certain allotment. They haven't said what percentage of reservations, but it will be a allotment of reservations at 7 p.m. the night before every single day for the day of tickets. So that's great. Or sorry, not day of tickets, like you get them the night before the day you want to visit. So that's great. There aren't any tickets, and I keep saying tickets, but you know what I mean. I mean reservations. There aren't any reservations available at the gate. So if you miss your entry slot, which they're 2 hour time periods, or you forget or something happens, unfortunately, you will get turned away at the gate. I also want to remind everybody who hasn't visited Rainier that there's no cell service at the park, like absolutely none. So you need to come prepared if you did go through the effort and everything, jump through all the hoops to get a reservation. Please be sure to print or screenshot your reservation. You will not be able to pull it up on your phone. Another important note is that these reservations are per car or per vehicle, so cars and motorcycles. So you don't need to book a separate reservation for every single individual person within your car. However, you still do need to pay the park pass for vehicles. So the reservation fee for timed entry is $2, and then park passes are dependent on the year. I think this year they're about $30. I could be wrong there. If you are wanting to visit Mount Rainier National Park, but you don't want to deal with the whole timed entry reservation system, trust me, I'm with you. You can still visit both the Paradise and the Sunrise corridors or enter into the park before 7 a.m. and after 3 p.m. every day, or just go visit during off peak season. I mean, the reservation system stops on September 2nd, and September is some of the best weather up on the mountain, in my opinion. So, you know, there's that. I would also encourage people to go explore other parts of the park because there are still other parts of the park that are open, and there are some surrounding areas that are so lovely to explore. High Rock Lookout is one of them, Tipsoo Lake, Summit Lake, the Mowich Lake area. There's a ton of different options for you to still get that true Tahoma experience without being in these really overpopulated areas of the national park. So check that out. I'd also encourage other people to check out like our state parks because those don't get enough love either. Now, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this because I know a lot of people have a lot of opinions about this. And before I get into that, if you have further questions about like what happens if you have a climbing permit or a wilderness permit or something like that, the nps.gov website has a ton of information and a really comprehensive FAQ section. So check that out. I'll have it linked below. Um, so yeah, let's talk about the pros and cons because everybody has opinions about this. Obviously, I have opinions too. So let's get into it. Now, it's important to understand the goals this pilot program is trying to accomplish. They have identified three main goals. Whether or not you agree with whether these are the correct three goals is a separate conversation. So the goals that the National Park System have proposed are one, improve guest experience, two, reduce overcrowding, and three, improve resourcing issues. Now, if we look at the numbers, I'm going to pull this up here. If we look at the numbers, I mean, these are valid concerns. And actually, if anybody has visited if anyone has visited Mount Rainier National Park in the last 3 years, you know that these are valid concerns too. Truly, actually, in the last decade, let's be real. So, from 2008 to 2021, annual visitation rose from 1.1 million visits per year to 1.7 million visits. They also noticed that there is an extreme concentration of these visits, with 70% or more of the million visits happened between July and September. So during this same period that we're talking about the reservation system happening. And it was concentrated in a small number of popular destinations, including Paradise and Sunrise. So what they did was they basically looked at all the visitation, where people were spending their time, and said, we got to fix this. We got to figure this out. Back last year in 2003, they did propose a couple of different options to solve these three goals and allowed the public to submit comments. So I'm not going to go over what all of the other options were because they already selected this one. So let's just talk about it right now. So let's talk about the pros, right? The first goal they have is to reduce overcrowding. And obviously, if you are restricting the access people have to the park, it's going to reduce overcrowding. Sure. There's not going to be as many people entering the park during peak season, peak hours. However, I don't know if for sure there's going to be less people visiting overall. I think that by having a reservation system be by car, might encourage people to carpool. So there's still going to be the same amount of people just in one car rather than a couple different cars. And this will help with lines, right? Not necessarily with the sheer amount of people. I do think this is going to help with visitor experience because obviously people don't want to wait in a giant long line of cars when they're trying to enter the park. So this will help with that. I do think it is more enjoyable to experience the park when there are less people around. So that certainly will help too. However, my concern there is I generally visit the park before sunrise and during sunrise, and usually like during peak hours I'm usually like napping and hanging out at my camp, or I'm wrapping up a hike. And then at sunset and after 3 p.m., that's when I'm enjoying the park. My concern there, and I know a lot of other people share this concern, is that during these off-peak hours they're going to become more crowded because people don't want to deal with the hassle of enduring the reservation system and getting reservations. So more people are going to be visiting during the off-peak hours. So, you know, the people are gonna visit no matter what. It's just a kind of a matter of when. So, anyways, there's that. And then finally, this whole concept of preserving and improving our resources. Now, there's kind of two different resources, at least the way I think of it. There's financial resources and administrative resources, and then there's natural resources. And when I think about my biggest concerns for the park as a whole, I think about the most pressing being preserving our natural ecosystems and our natural resources on the park, because we've all seen the damage that is done all the time. I don't know if this is the long-term solution to this particular problem. I think this is maybe a band-aid so that the natural ecosystems of the mountain can kind of catch their breath and restore. However, I personally think that the long-term solution here is something different, because I've been in the park when there have been no people except for like one guy, and that one guy's freaking in the meadow. Like, it doesn't matter really how crowded the park is. People are going to be thoughtless, they're going to be selfish, and they're going to go off trail and they're going to violate park guidelines, no matter how crowded it is. So, what I think we should invest in instead, if this is a goal of the park, is something else. I'm not sure what that is. I have some ideas, but I just don't think that a reservation system and restricting access is necessarily the end all be all for this particular issue. I want to talk about my biggest issue here is that there have been studies, one in particular, um, that the Washington Trails Association actually surfaced last year. I hadn't heard of it until then. But it basically was a study going into how reservation systems, specifically within national parks, impact different communities and people of different backgrounds. This study looked specifically at reservation systems for campgrounds, so it's a little bit different than the timed entry system. However, I do think it does, correlate and tell a good story about the types of people that use reservation systems. So this study basically looked at the data and found that the majority of people who held camping reservations in national parks were white, and they were from above the median income, family income. So this means that people who are at or below the average median income or are not white are less likely to make reservations. So I do see this as a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. That wasn't one of the national parks goals with this plan. So it's hard to critique them for their failure in taking this into account. However, I do think that DEI should be like a bullet point in every plan when we're talking about something that is supposed to serve the public, like our national parks. So that's an issue that I think needs to be considered in the future. So, anyways, this was a lot of information, and I am barely scratching the surface here. I think there are a ton of different considerations to look at and a lot of different implications of this new program. I'm thankful it's just a pilot program for now, so I'm curious to see how this peak season shakes out and if it does accomplish the goals that the national park system is trying to accomplish. We shall see. Let me know what your feedback is and your thoughts are in the comments. I'm going to link to some additional resources that probably articulated this much better than me. So if you're curious, check those out. Thank you.